Well, welcome, friends. My name is Untitled, and I'm serving as your webcast technical host for this series and for today, whether it's this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on your time zone. So welcome all. We hope that we have a few more that are still joining us, but glad to see those of you that have come to be here to hear this presentation on asylum seekers and a Christian response. But before we get into our actual program, just a few housekeeping items. I'm glad to say that we have the chat window that most of you have found there up on the upper left. Feel free to post your questions and comments for our presentations as we go along there. Rachel and Mike will be leading us, and I'll introduce Rachel shortly. And we're also glad to have Mike Piers joining us as part of the host and part of what we'll be being able to present to you today. But before we get there, again, feel free to chat there, and if you have technical questions, please let me know and I'll try to help. We have a few more broadcasts still coming up, as you can see directly above me. We have one on May 26th and then June 15th, and we still may be able to reschedule Dennis Edwards. We'll see how that goes. For those of you from the Church of the Brethren that wish to receive continuing education units for participation in this live broadcast, I'll also share that information with you at the end of our broadcast. But without further ado, Rachel, I'd like to invite you to join me on stage, and I'd like to turn it over to you and to allow you to introduce yourself and start us off.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can. Sounds good, Rachel.
Fantastic. So hello, everybody. I am Rachel, and I'm from Bristol in the UK, in the west of England. And I live in a house with 5 destitute asylum seekers. And my neighbour next door also hosts one guy from Morocco, and my neighbours over the wall with their children have also hosted over the last few years. And since 2009, I've been living with destitute asylum seekers as part of a response to the love of God and a call on my life that He's placed on me in terms of welcoming people that are on the edges and that other people don't want to welcome. I feel very much called to welcome those people specifically. And so I'm really pleased to do this, but it's a little bit of a difficult road. So I'll get on to that as time goes on. So I've been living here in this house since 2011 and previously in another community house. And I've hosted 23 different people from 14 different countries in that time. And so it's been an interesting journey. And so I'll just share a little bit of that. So we started coming together in these 3 houses, and I had this heart for asylum, but it didn't necessarily transfer to the other members of my community yet. They were certainly keen for us to meet the needs of people on the margins, and we were here together as people that love Jesus and wanted to share him with the world, but also wanted to see what it meant to work out following Jesus in a neighborhood that is diverse and is difficult sometimes, and that sometimes has really great things about it and sometimes has really challenging things about it. But this asylum thing I sort of shoved on everyone else, I think, a little bit. But it's been a very good journey for us together, and it's been amazing to see my neighbour next door get well. She was very ill for many years, but she's much better, and be able to be a huge part of providing support and advice, particularly advocacy, to those people that are living with us and also other people. So I also run a charity called Bristol Hospitality Network, which works directly with destitute asylum seekers in Bristol, and I'll come on to destitution and asylum and how things work with asylum in a minute. But I've been running that organisation for the last 2 years, and before that I also worked for Bristol Refugee Rights, which is a big drop-in centre for asylum seekers and refugees in Bristol, of all sorts of different countries and different places. I think that's what I was going to say about that. Oh, the other thing is, so what's happened in the last few years with our community is that we started off initially with 1 or 2 people staying with us, and that meant that we had maybe me and my housemate at that time, and then 1 or 2 people from different countries that stayed for a time. And they were, normally they were okay, and sometimes they were a bit tricky. So you had one lady who nearly set fire to her wig one day when she had a candle burning for some reason, and then fell asleep, heavily drugged with antidepressants, and fell asleep, and the candle burnt down, set fire to the chest of drawers, and the fire was dripping off the edge of the chest of drawers onto her wig as my housemate came into the house and noticed the smoke, and thankfully saved her wig from destruction. And we also had a guy stay with us who we knew had an issue with alcohol, but it became increasingly obvious that he had that, and so I moved alcohol from our house, any that we had, into another neighbour's house to keep it there for safety. Until it came to New Year's Eve, at which point he decided that he would have some wine, I think, that a friend had brought for a special dinner I'd planned. And it was very interesting learning about what it means to welcome people, because I decided that this was, I do things for other people, so on this occasion I'm going to do something for me. I'm going to invite my friends, the people I like, in direct contrast to the story that Jesus told of the guy that invited the people from the highways and byways. I decided, no, I'm going to have these nice friends of mine that I like, and they're all very normal and stable and not difficult people, and I'm going to have them for dinner. And so I had them for dinner, and this guy got totally drunk and then spat in everyone's food, upending his cup of gob on each person's plate, one after the other. And so my lovely, lovely sort of fun dinner party descended into complete and utter chaos. And then he stole a kitchen knife, and anyway, so it was all a bit disastrous. But in most cases, people have been quite straightforward. So from that phase, we moved into a sort of stable phase where we supported people mostly from Iran, and many of them came to faith in Jesus while they were here. And I don't think because of us, actually, I think because of the other Iranians who are amazing at sharing their faith with one another. And so it was an amazing time of seeing people really understand the love of God in Jesus that they'd never really known before. They'd been from Muslim backgrounds. They had known God as mostly as angry and mostly as demanding. And then suddenly to know God who met with them, who drew them in, who loved them, was a wonderful thing for them, and a wonderful thing for us to see, and really built our faith and helped us to see what God was doing among us, rather than just firefighting people with wigs and burning hair and, gobbing in everyone's food kind of experiences. We moved into this really blessed time of working with people who wanted to know so much about Jesus. And we'd been meeting together for a long time to pray a blessing over our area, which was how I moved here in the first place, another story. But we started to move into meeting with people from Iran, and so we had this bilingual Bible study, prayer, communion time together, which we've been doing since, which is about 3 years now. And so we've had that on Monday night. So there's a community of people. Some of them have lived with me, some of them have lived with our neighbours, some of them haven't lived with any of us, but are friends of those people that did, and mostly Iranian, and that meet together with us on a Monday, which has been an amazing thing for us to kind of grow in faith with them and to let them teach us too. So there's been this kind of crazy journey, and I didn't come into it easily. I came into it through, I think, a series of God incidences that drew me to this place. That it feels like this is the right place to be right now. And so our third phase, after the Iranians moved on and got leave to remain and started to move on with their life, was a new group of people who really are much more struggling in their life. And so now living with me, the people that stay here are much more sort of random, and so they will disappear off for hours and days and not come home always, and so there's a level of concern about them constantly in the background, which is a challenge. So this is more about community life that I'm talking about now, which I think will resonate with anyone really that lives in community, particularly with marginalised people. Very similar to that, and asylum seekers pretty much are just exactly the same as everyone else, except that they've had this experience that's made them leave their homeland and seek safety in another place. And so I think it would be helpful for us, I know this talking about asylum as well, be helpful for us to have a little bit of a picture of what it's like for people to seek asylum here, and a little bit about destitution. So I don't know whether, Anton, you're happy for us to show one of the videos that we had, but I'd like to show the one from Amnesty, if it's possible, just that explains a little bit about not the refugees welcome, the end destitution one. And then we'll take some questions. Great. Thank you.
If you are a refugee asylum seeker, you're not entitled to anything. As a human being, you do not exist anymore.
There are hundreds of thousands of people in this limbo of having been refused asylum here, technically having no right to be here, and yet remaining in the country.
They live in limbo, in this sort of world where they can't do anything. They're basically paralysed.
Morning to night, you're sleeping, go in the park. You know, sometimes make people crazy, you know.
Some people can go home safely, but for people where there is a real problem, they shouldn't be left in this situation.
It just didn't make sense to me that in a country which they call themselves civilized, they put an innocent man to die without any crime.
There shouldn't be a need for destitution in 21st century Britain.
That just doesn't work, and it's inhumane, and it shouldn't be practiced in a country like this.
There's no life. There's no life. No life.
Great, thank you. So that's just a short film. I think Mike's going to come in with some questions now, just a heads up. Those ones out there. So I hope.
Rachel, I'll join you for a moment while Mike is making his way.
Rush next door.
And just to say,
we've got him
Stan
sat the other
Duick
side
of the
of me,
Church of the
so I can
Brethren
look at
is the one
someone.
that has
But then
organized all
he's
these
also
webcasts
rushing
on our
next
side
door
and
every
pull
now and
things
then.
together. But Mike,
Hop
we're
on
so
the
glad to
computer on the
have
other
you join
side
us in
and then
Stan's
ask
place
some
as sort of the host
I'm
for
hoping
today.
he's coming up.
So Mike, if you take a moment to introduce yourself and share who you are in your role as our partner across the pond, as well as what you do, and then I'll let you and Rachel continue with your questions. Thanks.
Yes. Hello, everybody. It's really nice to be joining you in this webinar, and thanks, Rachel, for doing that. So, yes, I'm just over the other side of Bristol, also in a community, and I know some of our guys are here with us. Hello, guys. Nice that you've joined us. And we're looking for questions, really, and comments as we go through, and Rachel can respond to those. And since I've just rushed next door, I'm still catching up on what those are. So while I do that, Rachel, I got a question for you, as ever, that occurred to me as you were talking. So you talked about this phase of living here in a community, and some of the test of that, really. But how has that changed you? How have you found yourself being changed through that journey?
Yep. Well, I think that I started out in a relatively straightforward way. I was brought up in a comfortable rural location with a loving family, and I think that to see the people who are living with me and their struggle has been the most challenging thing. I think it was very easy to have faith in God that was good when things were good for me, when things were easy for me. That made it quite easy. But actually, when I look at the experience of the people that are living with me, particularly now, to see their struggle, the fact that they, sometimes they're brushing with the law. They're brushing with the law because of some of the stuff that they've experienced, some of the stuff that's impacting on their life. It's not really because they're particularly worse than I am. It's that they've had different experiences, different chances in life, and things that have deeply traumatized them, that have left them incapable of behaving normally in the situation that I think you should do this or you should do that. But in reality, you can't always make those choices when life has been so tough to you and dealt you such a hard deck of cards, you know. And so I think particularly this last group of people, this latest group, have really been teaching me about what it means to suffer with people who are on the margins, to understand God is still here, even when people are hurting, and even when people...
You make it sound surprisingly
really
normal
even in
to do
this
this kind
life.
of thing, Rachel.
You know, but I think that God is starting to do that in them, and we trust him for greater healing. But it's the hardest thing, is to sit with people when you can't change it. There's nothing I can do for them really, apart from offer them a safe place to live. I can't change the trauma that they've experienced.
Kind of intimated a little bit on that, very, but how does that actually happen?
Okay, well, and I think it's very clear that I can see the way that God has drawn me into it. I don't think that I necessarily would have ever imagined that I would enter into this kind of thing when I was younger. So it's been a bit of a surprise to me as well to end up here. But I can sort of see how different things that happen in my life got me to this point. And one particularly really important thing was I felt very dissatisfied with the normal way that church operated, where it felt that we did everything at arm's length away from people that needed our help and that needed Jesus. We did things for them, and we did things from a distance from them. And we did things where we would sit comfortably in our church, and then we'd go out and do community activism out there, and then we'd come back to the safe place. And I think I started to feel uncomfortable with that expression of faith, because I think that God is completely holistic. He doesn't separate himself into different bits, you know, the bit that goes out and the bit that stays at home and the bit that, you know, learns stuff. But all of us and all of our expression of faith has got to be all of our life. So I think I felt that was a calling that I needed to think of a bit more. And I spent some time praying. I went away specifically. I'm an 8. I don't know whether you know anything about the Enneagram, but I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. So, and also an extrovert, and therefore really struggle with contemplative prayer. You know, I'd love to be good at contemplative prayer, but I'm not. And so I was like, I'm going to go away, and I'm going to like be silent for some days, which was greatly shocking to me. But I did manage it a bit, and so it was quite an interesting time that I spent away. And I think at that time about 25, and thinking these thoughts, but not really being able to work out how to put them into practice. And on return from this week away with these Franciscan women, I ended up with all sorts of things falling into place in moving into Easton, and being able to start a ministry like this. I never sort of imagined that I would do it. But it sort of ended up happening almost by a load of God incidences. But the other thing that happened was that I met somebody from Afghanistan, and it was during a church social action outreach, so they're not all bad. And we met this guy from Afghanistan who was living in a foster family in Bristol, and so started to look after him and help him. And he came to Christ, and it was a journey with him over about 5 years as well, that really helped me see how offering sanctuary and caring for people, we can show the love of Jesus to them. And so I think his story really resonated with me. And he was deported to Afghanistan and nearly shot. No, he was shot. He was shot again, but he didn't die. And then finally he's managed to find sanctuary in Italy in the end, after I think a saga about 10 years long, but it is there now. So he had a profound influence on me as well, but also this this time with the Franciscan women really crystallized what God was calling me into and helped me to move to this particular part of town, which is the multicultural, diverse bit of it more, where there's, anyone on anything goes on in this area. And so it's been a place where it's possible to do this kind of ministry quite easily because everyone is here. This is where they want to be living.
Just so a last question, Rachel. It's a kind of combination of one that Enton's put up here and one that I've got. And then just let me go back into the second 10 minutes of your presentation. And with the invitation, if others want to ask questions, then please feel free to type them in the boxes I think Enton described earlier. So Enton says, how do you find individuals that end up being in community with? Mm-hmm. And my question is, what would have happened to the people that have been living with you if they hadn't been with you? What other kinds of provision might there have been? Would they have been out on the streets? So do you want to just, you might want to tackle those things in your next session, Rachel. If you're going to do that, then that's fine. But if not, it'd be interesting to hear a bit.
Okay, I think I'll just quickly answer that. So the reason that people become destitute is because their asylum claim has been refused, and that doesn't mean that that's the end of the road for them. It means they can make a fresh claim for asylum. So in the gap between those two things, the government makes them destitute and takes away their right to work if they ever had it, and doesn't allow them to rent a house and limits them from hospital treatment and loads of other shocking things. And we are the only agency in Bristol Hospitality Network, which is what I run, but also how I work out who lives with me in answer to Enton's question, which is through that agency. That organisation is the only organisation in the city that's supporting people in destitution specifically. So there are occasional spots in night shelters, which are open 5 days out of 7 in the week. So one guy, we said to him, do you want to come and stay here on 2 nights a week on the sofa, when you can't be in the night shelter? And then, that means you don't have to sleep rough on that night, but otherwise he would. And so really there's very, very limited provision. And that's one of the reasons that it's quite a pressure because, it's already a madhouse. So you might as well just make it more mad every week. There's a temptation for another random offer to somebody, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. And so, it's a little bit easier for us because we've already got a lot of people, whereas people that host one person and in a house with them, I think it's a much more intense relationship than it is when you just go barmy.
Right.
Go barmy is the answer.
Okay, excellent, Rachel. Good answers. Do you want to take on the next 10 minutes?
Yeah. Excellent. So I can look at you. Okay, that's great. Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. So really what I wanted to deal with in the second part of it was around, sorry, Anton, I've got a strange feeling. Oh, no, it's fine. What I wanted to deal with in the second part is about incarnation. I'm thinking about what it means to live alongside people who are in this kind of struggle. I think it's the living alongside them bit that I want to focus on today, rather than necessarily the intricacies of the asylum system itself. Suffice to say, it's absolutely shocking, and if you investigate it at all, and I've given some links to videos that people could watch in order to help understand a bit more about the system in the UK and what it does to people. But I'm not going to focus on that so much. I'm thinking more about what it's been teaching us as community and me about God and about incarnation and about how we live with people. How do we break down the barriers between us that there are so clearly in our society that stop people knowing each other, stop people understanding each other, stop people really being able to engage well with each other. So those barriers have started to be broken down as people live with me. So it's been an interesting journey to think about that. And where I started was with Jesus, absolutely doing the wrong thing all the time. He was a bit naughty. He used to hang out with all the wrong people. He annoyed everybody who was good and proper. And obviously that appeals to me immensely, that kind of life. And so I'm quite happy with a little bit of naughtiness. And so I think there's something about making our whole life an expression of our faith, which I started to say earlier. That's a really important calling on people. And I feel like in the church we can so easily distance ourselves from the people that are the wrong type of people. But I think God calls us to hang out with them and go on their probation visit with them and all this stuff, to spend time with those guys. And in terms of Jesus shocking people, I think we've really loved digging into the story of the prodigal son in recent months and years, partly because it's been an interesting part of reading this book, Miroslav Volf's Exclusion and Embrace. Mike, very pleased I'm showing this one. Yeah, okay. And he also mentions that, but also because there's another book which is actually up here, which is called Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, which we've also found really helpful. Kenneth Bailey, which talks about the prodigal son and as a central theme in Jesus's teaching, a central theme in Jesus's way of expressing the world. And I think it's because this, in recent years we've started to struggle a little bit more, think through a little bit more what this parable means for us. And certainly for me, I feel like I've been the older brother. I've been good. I've lived a relatively okay life. I don't feel like I've been relatively dutiful. I've tended to do the right thing. And the people that I live with tended in some ways to do the right thing, particularly the Iranians. They were generally okay. But this lot that are living with me now don't do the right thing ever. They're always doing the wrong thing. And so it's been really interesting over the last few months to think through that, to think through what that means and how much like the older brother I am in that story, and how I struggle so much to be gracious to them when actually that's the calling. So it's like thinking through what the rub that community creates, the rub that living with people who are different than you creates, that makes you think more deeply about what it means to follow Jesus and how much more challenging that is in this sort of way of life than it would be if I'd kept my old way, which I enjoyed as well, but didn't have the same friction in it, didn't have the same challenge. And so I think I welcome the challenge that this kind of life brings, because it helps me to really seek the depths of the grace of God and to know the response of the Father is the response that we're called to give to the broken in our world. And there's so many people on the margins of different types and different situations, and asylum seekers are one of them. I recognise that many people work with all sorts of different people in that kind of area, but I really feel that's the call of the church, to go out to the edges and not to stick in the middle, and really to listen to Jesus's call on us, not to stay distant as the older brother on the edge of things, but to embrace with the Father the prodigal in our nation, and to go to them and to welcome them. And so I think that incarnation for me means choosing the people that everyone else rejects and hanging out with them and learning to love them as Jesus loves them, as I know that he loves them, and really trust him for them, that he would keep hold of them and draw them into new life with him, which he has done with some of them, and I just keep calling on him to keep doing with the rest. The reason that it's been difficult is because the people who live here have been difficult. They'd all been nice and thankful and, generous-hearted and given back what I gave to them. That would have been so much easier, but they don't. Sometimes they are rude, sometimes they are self-seeking, sometimes they are very ungracious. Mostly they are very unthankful. And you have to just get over yourself, in the end. You just have to get over yourself and not worry about that, and start to really begin to trust in God that the love that he has for them will start to kind of rub off somehow in us and make me less of a bad person. But I think the thing is I've realised over the last few years, particularly over the last few months, what a bad version of myself I can be in a tough situation, in a tough setting, and how rude I can be to people sometimes in that kind of way. And I just trust that God will keep building grace Sorry, I've just got a visitor. Hello. Nasa, do you mind? Hello. Welcome. Very good. Thank you. Very good. I'm just on the computer. Okay. So, sorry. So it's been an interesting journey for me in that. And the other person that's had an influence on me is Richard Rohr. So I'm just thinking through some various books, hanging up books. This Enneagram book's been really amazing for me because I used to think that I was a helper, you know, like I was a determined helper, which is a 2 on the Enneagram, for those that understand it. But I don't think I am. I think I'm an 8, a sort of control freak, and, you know, pushy person, irritating, annoying person. And the worst version of me, when things are most tough, is exactly like that. And God calls me out of that into grace, and out of, you know, control into humility and into giving up my power to him. And so it's been an interesting journey to kind of understand a little bit of personality in this kind of very intense setting that is just everything all in one and no escape ever from anything. To be able to sort of wrestle with some of that and to understand something more of that. And the other person that's been really helpful for me is Dave Andrews, who's written this great book called The Jihad of Jesus, which talks about Islam. He's Australian, I think. And it talks about Islam and how Christians and Muslims can talk together, understand one another, learn to talk about Jesus together, because actually our Muslim brothers and sisters love to talk about Jesus. And so I think Jan's going to come and talk about that in a few 2 weeks' time. Jan will talk a bit about that and how great it is to have those conversations. But also how we are in this struggle, a non-violent struggle for justice in the world, and how we're in that together with other people. So I'm living in this relatively, you know, started off quite flat. You know, I was like, oh, I'm just going to do everything. Everyone can have a say in everything. And it became a little bit more difficult because of behaviour difficulties. And so we've ended up having to sort of apply some rules. But basically trying to struggle for justice alongside people that are absolutely denied any kind of, they don't have power, they don't have any say, they don't have a voice, they have nothing. And so to be able to work alongside those people and live with them and experience some of the injustice that they experience by that close encounter with them in their life has been a really important thing. And sorry, some weird things. Okay. So I think that's probably what to say in number 2. Okay. If that's it, I'm just going to send Mike running off.
Yes, and so you might want to say, I've got a question for you, Rachael. So you said about barriers. What kind of barriers find? What are your answers?
Okay, Mike's asked a question about barriers. What kind of barriers have I experienced between myself and the people that I live with? And so one barrier has been, I'm a woman and I live here well, I don't live on my own, I live with 5 men, but anyway, they're not my husband. And so it's been quite a difficult thing for them, I think. It's sort of been weirdly easier for me, but I think it's difficult for them culturally to do that. And so there's a little bit of a kind of sense of uncertainty about that situation with them. So that's been an interesting barrier. And also I have some ability to sort out my own life. I can make decisions. I have family backing me. I have a lot of stuff behind me. And actually the people that live with me at the moment have nothing. For 2 of them, both of their parents have been killed and they don't have any family left that can help them. And for others, they have missing family members and difficult things like that. So it's been very tricky for them to keep going. And so, yeah, so I think the barriers of like my level of privilege and other people's lack of privilege is difficult to cope. Put those, I think that's equal, really. Is that what you were asking?
That sounds really helpful, Rachael. What I heard of that, and I've got lots of more questions on that, which I'll come back to in a moment. If somebody might want to rescue you from my questions by putting some questions up themselves, but So the Null West group, cheers to the Null West group here. So Rachel, can any church host like you do, or does it take a special personal calling? What are the boundaries for people feeling called to this? So something about the boundaries you've set up. You said you've set up some rules, and is this special calling, or can anybody do it?
Has that for each of us, and it's not always the same. So yes, it's possible for anybody to host destitute asylum seekers. I don't think there's really a reason why anyone should not do it. We've had people in our network, it's definitely not just me, there's lots of other people around Bristol that are hosting. And I think for most people, it's easier when there's more. In my situation, it's weirdly easier, and I don't really understand why. But because we have a very open kind of community feel, and our street's quite friendly, and people generally are kind of good with random people living in places, it's easier. Whereas if you live in a kind of posh bit of town, and there's you and your cat, and then you've got your 4 spare bedrooms, and your children have all left home or something, and then somebody comes to live with you, they might feel a bit more out of place. Whereas because everything's broken and rubbish in our house, it's sort of easier for people. They don't feel so that's okay. So I think in a way anyone can, but I think there are difficulties sometimes. So we find people that host on their own really struggle to keep doing that because it feels so intense, and that's a struggle for them. Depends if it's a good match. We're trying to find a good match, but I really think it's possible for anyone to host. And boundaries-wise, what we've started to do is we've started to say you must come and clean on this time, on this day, for this amount of time, and you must try and come to a Friday night community meal. So we haven't done that much boundary setting, but we have done that. And I don't care when people come in, whether they come home or not. And when they come in, I kind of leave them to their own devices on that. And because I'm sleeping in the top of the house, it means that I don't hear them anyway, so I just blissfully fall asleep, and they could be wandering the street or anything. So it's fine. So kind of being relaxed is helpful, I think. Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it would.
Great, thank you. And I must say, so we're here. I just keep running backwards and forwards from Rachel's house next door to Penny's house, which is part of the community, and I'm looking into the back garden of David and Tora's house over there, and there's a whole load of people playing in the street just outside. It's like a playground out there rather than the streets. It is a lovely kind of community atmosphere, Rachel, isn't it? It's almost the ideal kind of place to host people in a non-institutional way, but a really kind of friendly neighbourhood sort of way. I guess if you had a main road outside, it would be quite a different feel. So Naomi is asking a question here which really resonates a lot with some of the things that we've explored as well in other webinars. So she says, do you have good examples, have examples of good with times rather than having
but we've had to
do things to people? Can we move beyond entertaining and providing purpose or other important factors? So is there something you could say? But I guess it's about those spaces.
Because I felt that was where I learnt the most. But there have been a huge amount of times of fun. Otherwise, I wouldn't still be able to cope with doing it.
And what they look like.
there's enough joy in it to make it worthwhile. I'm still happy doing it. I'm not fraught all the time. But there are certain things that have been difficult, have helped me to grow the most, and so that's why I've mentioned them. So yeah, is that the answer? Yeah, I think it might not be 10 minutes. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I hope in about a couple of minutes' time, I'm going to be showing another film, just to give Enton a heads up, which will be the one about BHN, about people talking about BHN. So you'll get a bit of a picture from some of the people that we posted, including the wig lady, who has a little cameo appearance. Anyway, so I suppose one of the things is that it feels to me like I've been hosting for 7 years, and I'm only just starting to touch the surface or break the surface in terms of what it means to do incarnational ministry in this setting. I feel like we're not there yet. I'm not there yet. I don't get it yet. And so
great. Thank you, Rachel. I've just been told that my microphone volume is much too high.
Slightly different places.
I hope that's a little bit better.
Here. Some of them
so on that
places,
happy note, and with those very helpful answers, thanks, Rachel. We go to the final 10 minutes or so, and then the last opportunity to ask any questions. So, Rachel, back over to you.
In our concrete garden. And it's also tricky because we're in the middle of the inner city, and so the inner city's entertainments are available to people, and so when the things that could make them really work on some of the stuff that they're struggling with and help them deal with those can easily be undone by walking out the door and meeting somebody unhelpful and hanging out with them, and so it feels like a sort of difficult thing it's really difficult to actually help people sometimes. It's good to laugh. I think if we can learn to know one another well enough to laugh at each other and to be able to have good fun times together, then that can break through quite a lot. So it's been fascinating coming into spring from a deep winter, not very cold, but a long dark winter, and coming into the spring this year when things have been so difficult over this winter, and then we're able to be outside. We can have our random kids from the community come and play badminton with us and hang out, and people will stick around a bit more, and the evenings are longer, and everything just becomes so much easier as the spring comes and the summer comes. And so it's been good, and good to recognise that there'll be those cycles will happen in the year, and that prepared for winter means more than having a stock of firewood, but also making sure that we have things that we can be doing with people that mean that we don't lose that sense of community over those winter months, which I think is actually quite a big risk. Got not much space inside, so our outside space makes a big difference in the spring and summer. And I think when we get to the point where we're strengthening and building one another up, then it can be a fantastic, positive experience to live in community in this way. And we have to keep putting effort into our relationships. I've been struggling with that a little bit because I've been wanting to have this sense of everything being everything. So the people that we live with, whether they're Muslim or Christian or Hindu or whatever, and us growing in love of Jesus together, somehow doing that. I've wanted that. And I've wanted us to be able to support one another in difficult times. And sometimes they've been able to do that for me. My father died last year, and the people in this house were amazing, really amazing with me in that time, really supportive, really held me up, came to the funeral, massive loads of people came to the funeral. My parents' village had never seen so many people from a different country in their entire life. And it was an amazing, amazing thing. They gave me that beautiful gift in that time. So people can sometimes hold you up too, and accepting that help from other people, I think, is a good thing for me to learn as an 8. But I do believe that real incarnation is integrated, but I find it's still very difficult to do that in practice. So even though things are more integrated here than they've been in any other time in my life, and than they are in many other situations, and I acknowledge that that's, in some ways, that's quite an interesting picture for people to see how it works here. But it's still not totally there, because really we need those sort of safe people, and so at the moment the people that live with me are not normally that safe. They're normally a little bit risky and in some trouble, and so our neighbours Penny and David and Toria are vital for us, and we are, effectively Penny and I operate as one house now. We might as well just knock the wall down in between the houses and have one, really, but we haven't done it yet. It's pretty much one house, and so that's a very strong relationship. But our relationship with David and Toria, we've needed to refocus on that and start to build times of prayer in. So we've started having a community prayer time where we really pray for God's intervention in some of the guys' life, which is really needed. And so that's been a good thing, a good learning thing as well. And we've had to learn, and we're just starting to think about lament and how lament operates. Hello, Sammy. Good to see you. So we've been thinking about how lament operates. How do we really mourn some of the injustice that people are experiencing? How do we mourn some of the choices that people have made that have caused them harm? How do we mourn with people when they're assaulted for no reason, or accused of something they didn't do? How do we mourn with those? How do we lament? So we're thinking a little bit about that. So it's been an interesting journey. And the other thing that I have been involved in is Servants to Asia's Urban Poor. So I'm on the board of that in the UK. And that's an organisation that works in Asia, in slums in Asia, and people go to live in slum communities in a deeply holistic and incarnational way. And I think certainly there's a sense that what we're doing here, we're trying to take on board some of the lessons from people that have gone wholeheartedly into a slum community and had to cope and survive there, and that be the way they've dealt with it, rather than say, okay, we're going to plan how we do our engagement with the community, and we're going to do it on this day, and then we're going to go back to our normal family life. But say, okay, let's throw ourselves headlong into it and see what happens. And actually what happens is God is still there and God still holds us up, but it's risky. It feels risky. It feels like this way of life has the opportunity of burnout in it at any moment, and so we acknowledge that risk, but we need to hold on to something of a difference for those of us that really know Jesus and love Jesus and walk with him. We need to be able to hold on to one another a little bit in the midst of it. So we're struggling to work out how those things operate. How do you throw yourself headlong in to this community life and not separate everything out into its special box, and yet still maintain a healthy spirituality and a sense of like groundedness in the work that we're doing, and know that we're relying on God for it rather than just hope it will be okay. I think that I'm finished.
Rachel, is this the one you wish to have shown?
Okay, Mike is just going to ask a question. I was going to show the video. Do you want to watch the video after the question or before?
Let's watch the video.
Okay, let's watch the video.
And I'm from Somalia.
I come from Iran. I'm from Zimbabwe.
I come from Sudan. I was really destitute, but PHN was the only authority, the only organization that gave me shelter for that time. So the life was hard to me without PHN.
Mainly these people from war-torn countries who fear persecution.
I have in a long time, something like 15 years. I didn't see my mother, that's very hard.
It is 7 years and 5 months since I haven't seen my children in Africa. Since I was not able to move, since I was not able to work even, because the Home Office said you cannot work, you cannot move, but PHN is the one that, helped me and some other, destitute, asylum seekers.
They are amazing group, okay? They make your life is easier for the asylum seeker and refugee person when they come to the UK and actually to Bristol. They find the homeless people, they help them, they find some place to live. For example, I had a lot of problems 5 years ago when the Home Office is cut all my support. They found some place to live for me and for my daughter as well. And they support me until more than 5 years. And the food, the house, and everything. I'm volunteering more than 7 years, more than 7 years. I work with the Hospitality Network, and I work with the Bristol Refugee Right. Also, I work every Tuesday in Borderland, St. Nicholas Church, as a volunteer, because I'm chef.
I hope the life is going to change very soon.
Companies like Bristol Refugee Rights, PHL, Borderlands, they really, really look after us. I don't have any chance for college to learning English, just the BHM group for English classes and Bristol Refugee Rights. I used some classes for my learning.
So we are talking to any individual or individual who is helping the destitute.
Great. I am back again, having dashed next door. So yeah, I missed some of that. But yeah, some more questions coming up here, Rachel, which would be good to think about. So some of the guys from the States are talking about the ways in which actually a lot of the refugee situation seems to be very tightly government controlled in the States, and wondering how different.
Thanks. I think Mike's coming in.
Much about the differences between our two nations. But again, how do you work together with government here, and what? I guess the people you're talking about are people who are often kind of falling through the official net, aren't they? Do you want to say a bit about that?
Mm. Yeah, I think the government aren't that keen on us, really, which I'm quite proud of. They have deliberately made people in the position that means that we need to be here and that we need to support them. So it was very much a deliberate choice of the UK government to make people destitute. They think what that means is that people that they don't think have a case will therefore want to return to their country of origin. So they're trying to make life so awful for them in the UK that they make a deliberate choice to return to the place that they fled from. The reality is that people who come as asylum seeker doesn't mean immigrant coming to look for a better life. Asylum seeker means person seeking safety and sanctuary. And so as someone who's seeking asylum comes to the UK, what they're doing is they're trying to find a place where they can be safe. Their life has been threatened in their own country, and they're coming to seek safety here. And even the people who are refused, who are the people that we're supporting, those people have exactly the same reasons to seek safety here. It's just that they weren't listened to the first time. Maybe they had a poor interpreter. Maybe they had a racist immigration official. Maybe they had no evidence of their claim, and you have the burden of proof is on the claimants for asylum in the way that it isn't in criminal law. It's the opposite. So there's a whole load of reasons why people might be refused, but actually have a really good reason to still be here. I also feel there's a sense of common humanity that for certain people, where it's not so clear, where there isn't necessarily a clear-cut asylum claim, for whom maybe about 20% of the people in BHN that would apply to, there's still a sense of the fact that these people are here, and I think as a global citizen, they are my brother or sister, wherever they're from and whatever their struggle. And I kind of feel like, we have to get beyond worrying about resource management, which is kind of the root reason behind people rejecting refugees, which is really about being afraid of losing out financially, really. And I think that can't be our criteria. I own this house, so that makes
so there's another
different person than
kind of
many
point,
other
or
people in
maybe a
my
question
area.
here from Thomas.
But I think,
Rachel,
certainly
you're
it's
certainly beginning to address there, and which
possible
maybe is
to have
critical
5 people that
observation.
can't pay you any money
He
live
says,
with you
especially
on
in
a
the current climate in the
small
US,
salary
our first, but not
and
only,
survive.
must be a
So I think
spiritually to regain the
there's
sense
room within
that we are kin
nations, just
to
not room
the
in the heart.
refugees, and that they are not the other to be feared and hated. And I guess there's a kind of sense, isn't there, in which you can say, well, the provisions out there, government's doing this, and that really veils a deeper truth that actually there are kind of excuse really not to embrace others, but to leave it up to the official channels, as it were. So, I don't know if you want to say something about that, or I mean, you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, so Donald Trump, for example, was talking about Americans. Sorry, Americans. Donald Trump was talking about building a wall to stop the Mexicans coming into America. Okay, and in England we went, oh my goodness, what is this man on? Is he bonkers? Which may be true, but the reality is that in our nation, our government is building a giant fence to stop people coming from Calais in France, across the English Channel to England, as if we're some sort of ancient Viking, stopping the Viking invasion, as if there's going to be so many people coming that we won't be able to cope. We've got less refugees here than we had 20 years ago, 10 years ago, when the government put in place those rules that now make people destitute and make the whole system totally inhumane, as it is now, degrading to people. And so the situation's different now. It's actually, there's an opportunity to do something better now, whereas it's being pitched totally differently to that in the media. And so that really, it's about the heart. Where is our heart? And I think Thomas is right in terms of
So there's
the sense that we're
here,
kin.
which I guess relates quite
I think it's also about understanding following Jesus in terms of a change of the heart that changes each person individually, but changes gradually a whole nation's thinking in terms of starting with small acts of love and sharing and generosity and welcome to people on the margins. Yeah. Yeah, it's been my great privilege to meet and know people of a Muslim background and Muslim people, actually, and to see their love for God and their integrity in their following of Him. And so I think Jan's webinar will be really interesting on that topic in a couple of weeks' time. But it's been for me a real privilege to do that, and I think it's demystified the whole thing for me, which is interesting. So I feel a little bit like, there's common ground between Muslims and Christians, that we can spend time with each other really helpfully, finding more about Jesus and starting to follow Him. In terms of my personal relationship with God, I think what it's done is it's stopped me thinking that it's all about me. And, sometimes I think it's very easy in the church to preach and to think and to sing about a relationship with God that is basically about, here I am, here's God. And God and I are having this conversation about how I'm going to be better, or how I'm going to be saved, or about how I'm going to grow in my knowledge of Him, or the Spirit's going to come and fill me. And I think that's actually the world, the sense of injustice in the world and the things that we're dealing with people and the way that we're living with people is making me realize that things are more corporate than that, and faith is more corporate than that too. So it isn't just about a personal relationship that I have with God, but also the way that I relate to the whole created order,
Rachel,
the
thank
earth
you. Just
and its
so there's one or two more
people,
questions, then we'll
and
start to
how
draw to an
I
end.
can love them
If I've missed any
or not
questions
love
out, do
them,
retype
and how I
them
can know
hint, but
Jesus in them or
I guess
not
this
try and
comes back a
find
little bit to
Jesus in
barriers.
them.
Somebody's asking
You know,
about.
and that's a
Do
choice.
you,
It's
in your
about
experience,
it's not
people with
just about
children,
me and my walk with God, but it's about the
in
whole
house
earth and the
host,
whole world.
or are there other examples of that kind of question that you would look at a situation, you say actually this isn't the right time or situation for somebody?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there are often times when it doesn't quite fit, but that doesn't mean that people with children can't host. Obviously, the difficulty from just giving you my BHN, my manager of BHN answer is yes, it's possible for people with children to host, but on their own risk, and they have to take that risk themselves. So you have to meet the person that you're going to host, get to know them a bit, spend as long as you like getting to know them a bit, and then see whether you think you want to take the risk for your family and your children of having them come live with you. I don't think it's any different having a destitute asylum seeker come live with you than it is having a person who's a lodger in your house.
And it's been interesting.
And to see it that way is more helpful, I think,
guys across the
than
back
seeing
fence
it as
like
like
three children,
an extra special scary thing, because
now
people
they're
are
mid-teens
pretty
to
much
late
just
20s
ordinary
as
people.
well.
But they
We've
have
had
experienced huge
extraordinarily
trauma.
positive
But
relationships
so
with,
sometimes the trauma
with the
doesn't really
people
come
being
out in
hosted
the
there.
home. Often the trauma
And
comes out in the
enormously
way they
enriching
respond to
experience,
difficult circumstances.
for them as a family and as individual children. So yeah, they've got to know the world, I think, in some ways they wouldn't have done otherwise.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. 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 And they've also hosted, so although they have those three children, they have hosted, but the way that it's worked is because they knew me and they are in and out of this house a lot and come and hang out here quite a lot. It means that they already knew people, so we tended to put with them somebody that they'd already met that had lived here. So it was a known person. So often with people with children, what I'll do is I'll suggest somebody that I really know I can trust will be fine with them. But I obviously can't legally say I know this person will be fine, because I can't say, and there's no way you can look back and see the person's history and what they've done before, so you can't tell at all. And it is a risk that family takes. I think
so just
particularly
a
in this
practical
case,
question,
because David and Toria knew us.
are
and
you
knew
open
the
to a
people
short
that
visit?
We're going to come and live with them. It was
like an
easier for them
afternoon
to
for
say
somebody
yes
from
to those
outside the
people.
community?
Oh, that one, I know him. That makes it easier. And it's exactly the same as having a lodger, a friend of a friend.
So
can
maybe we
stay.
can, if you look at
I
the
know
Urban
it
Life
doesn't seem the same,
website,
but it pretty much is. It's just you
my
don't get any
email
money.
address is on there, and I can happily forward that to Rachel for you. Just to say, as we draw into a close as well, is that in 2 weeks' time we are welcoming Jan Pike
from
to come
Durham,
and present a
USA.
seminar.
That's
She
a long way to
lives,
come, but you're very welcome.
100 yards from
Make
here,
it a week.
around the corner, and she's in particular been convening conversations with Somali Muslim women for a number of years now. And so we're looking at how do you use conversation to cross cultural faith barriers or boundaries and be able to talk meaningfully to each other. So Jan will be tackling that and talking about her story and her experience in a few weeks' time. Have we got another question? Typing. And so one last question, we'll go out with this one, Rachel. But so you talk about asylum seekers, and I think there are a lot of things that you see that a lot of others don't see because of your experience. Could you say what are the one or two key things about the things that asylum seekers experience, which are generally hidden, but which make life very distinctive or difficult?
Mm. Yeah. So if you imagine that you're that you go to live overseas somewhere. I think that's part. It's like the beginning of that's something that's easy-ish to imagine doing. That's part of the big problem. So one of the guys that lives with me came in earlier. One of the two random visitors that came in earlier. He has a wife and a 4-year-old boy. And when he first came to the UK, the boy was 18 months or 2. And so a lot of this child's growing up, he's only seen on Skype. So for him, I think that's been a challenge. So that's a thing, an easy thing to understand, being distant from family, being a long way away from the people that can support you. What that specifically means for asylum seekers, I think, is that they find it very difficult to just get on with their life. So if you imagine that somebody gets leave to remain, and I often assume that it will be relatively easy for them to sort themselves out and find a job and crack on, but it isn't always for them, and it's partly because they don't have any networks. They don't really have that many people behind them that back them, and so I think that's a really big struggle. The biggest thing is trauma, and some people's trauma. There are different times that people experience trauma. Many people experience trauma in their home country, and that's why they left. So, for example, a guy that was bombed in his convoy and woke up 17 days later with a plastic chest having been inserted to replace his rib cage, or people who had been trafficked and potentially, bad things have happened to them in their history, people whose parents have been brutally killed. And so there are things that people have experienced themselves and things that have really profoundly affected them in their history that are from their home country, from the reason that they left. But very often there are also traumatizing elements of the journey to the UK. I mean, I mentioned the fence in Calais. What that sometimes means is that people travel across many countries, turn up at this place that's like worse than a camp in northern Kenya, in terms of hygiene, and there isn't any toilets, and there's just open sewers, and everything's horrendous, and it's starting to improve now. But those situations have been very, very difficult for people, and their journeys have sometimes been very unsafe, and they've sometimes been taken advantage of or abused in those journeys as well. So those can also re-traumatize people. And then their experience in the UK with the system, the asylum system as it stands, also has the same impact on people. So the way that the people are treated in the asylum system is itself a traumatizing element, and it causes people harm. And so that's, I think, one of the really, really tricky elements. And all of those 3 elements, all of those 3 sections of somebody's life, the asylum claim process and the travelling to the UK process and the thing that caused them to leave their country process, they build one on the other in terms of causing additional trauma. And every trauma builds on the next and causes greater harm. So it's not at all surprising that when people are here, they sometimes really, really struggle. And I think it's more remarkable that they cope so well.
Rachel,
and in
thank
so
you
many
ever so
cases,
much.
although because I'm in the midst of living with
have a
some slightly
conversation
trickier
with you, and
people
thank
at
you
the moment, I'm
for
sounding like
everybody
a
who's
door
joined
but
us.
it's not
Really great to have
normally
people
that
from
bad.
Northwest and around
But
the
like,
world,
I think it's remarkable
as well
that people
as
have done so
from
well
here in Bristol
under
and from other parts of Britain. So
kind
thank
of
you.
experiences that they've had that
And
for many people
across the river.
Really
and the webinar will be online. So hopefully within 10 days or so, we'll have this webinar up online. You can access it through the Urban Life website. I'll put the address up there. A number of other webinars, and these kind of issues and situations about how Christian communities might engage themselves in situations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rachel and Mike, if you stay with us just for a minute, I have a few wrap-up details. And first, for those of you that have participated with us today, there's the quick poll of how helpful was the presentation, the content and the learning that Rachel and Mike provided, and then how well did you like this webinar format, the online meetings. For those that are from the Church of the Brethren and want continuing education units, here's the information of where to go, and I'll copy and paste that over as a live link there into the chat. And Rachel and Mike, I just want to add my thanks to both of you, but Rachel especially to you for sharing not only from your heart but from your own life things that are that obviously you have had to walk through and live and now can share with us, and your journey is calling us to faithfulness in a very special way. And I so much appreciate the way that you've been able to lead us on that journey today in this last hour. So thank you, and blessings on all the craziness and joy that comes in that ministry. Mike, thank you for standing in for Stan at this point, and glad to hear more about the Urban Life website, and I'll just draw people's attention to that, www.urbanlife.org. You can find out more, and again, as Mike said, return for our next webinar coming up in a couple weeks with Jan Pike. And so with that, and before we end, Rachel, would you like to send us out with a special blessing that comes out of your experience and out of what you're living?
Absolutely. Amen. Okay. Our Father, we thank you that you are always with us, even when people are struggling. Amen. And the world seems so
Thank
dark.
you for those
but
of you
Father,
who
we
are
pray
in
your blessing,
the United Kingdom. Good
we trust
evening.
that you
For
are
those of
building
you
your
who
kingdom.
are
We trust that
here in
you
the States,
are making
good
all things
afternoon.
new.
And
We trust that you
Rachel,
are
thank you
renewing
so
your
much.
creation.
Mike, thanks
so
for
we
your
pray
help.
this blessing
Blessings all, and
over each person who's been on this
we'll conclude the
webinar
webinar
today.
here.
We pray
Thank
it
you so
over
much.
this house and the people that live